Welcome to the Happy Doc, the voice of fulfilled physicians. This show is about bringing inspirational, creative, successful, and happy health professionals to you. Get ready to learn how you can be a happy doctor too. How's it going, everyone? I'm looking forward to giving you guys another episode of the Happy Doc. Wanted to let you guys know about the video we posted on the Facebook page. It was titled, and we posted on Facebook as the Happy Doc public presentation, where we presented to the Council of Osteopathic Student Government Presidents. That video has been seen about 1,000 times now, and has a lot of engagement, which is really exciting. It was one of our first major presentations, which was really cool. And it was nice to just kind of get our name out there in the more public space. We're obviously very excited about what we do on the Happy Doc, learning from great guests and applying information that we can use to inspire our lives on a daily basis as practicing students, residents, doctors, and so that was a really great experience, and I want everyone to check that out. We'll definitely be adding that on our Happy Doc website page as well as we start to do a little bit more build out. I want to move forward and introduce our next guest, and that's Dr. Jude Burke, PhD. She has a PhD in human and organizational development, and she's a successful speaker, author, and executive coach. And I was really excited to learn from Dr. Burke about the 2 books she has published. First, The Millionaire Mystique, How Working Women Become Wealthy, and How You Can Too, and The Adversity Advantage, Turn Your Childhood Hardship into Career and Life Success. And these books do a lot of the heavy lifting for us. She has spent a lot of hours understanding how successful people are successful. You know, she has broken down looking at these women, for example, and understanding the qualities and traits that allow them to be successful in their lives. And I wanted to understand that and understand how we as doctors might apply that to our lives. And also, interestingly, how we take hardships and take those hardships and utilize them as assets that we can use as fuel and energy to be able to drive us in the work that we do. So I'm really excited for you guys to listen to our conversation. And I want you guys to definitely check out her website, judemillerburke.com. And the show notes and the books that we discussed, that's going to be on the Happy Doc webpage, so you can definitely reference Dr. Burke's books on the website. So without further ado, let's take a listen and learn from Dr. Jude Burke. Hello, everyone. This is Taylor, and this is another episode of the Happy Doc. I am truly honored for us having this next guest. Her name is Dr. Jude Burke. She's a speaker, a consultant, an author. She coaches in the fields of leadership and team and performance. And something that gets me really excited before she starts talking, something that gets me really excited about this interview is we talk about a lot of amazing things and skills that we need to build in our own lives. She talks about career and leadership. She talks about how to build success in your life. She's author of 2 books, The Millionaire Mystique and Adversity Advantage. And in these books, she researches successful individuals, millionaires, and also individuals who had tough childhood adversity and how they built success in their lives. So I'm really looking forward to understanding more about her research and her work. It's an absolute pleasure to have you. So without further ado, Dr. Burke, can you introduce yourself?
Thank you, Taylor. I appreciate being on your show.
Awesome. I'm really excited to have you. So, Dr. Burke, something I love to ask my guests is, how did you become interested in the work that you do, going into research and developing your career? What was the impetus of all of that?
I started the research about 5 years ago and had moved from Minneapolis to a wealthy suburb of Phoenix, Arizona. And over the cup of coffee or glass of wine, I talked to many people, and they would share with me about the adversity they had come from, whether that be poverty, childhood abuse, alcoholic parents, and they still went on to create very obvious success. So that was the genesis of the study. And I know I grew up in rural Minnesota, and my parents were 18 years old when they got married and did not have the opportunity to go to college.
Wow.
But all of their kids went on and received graduate degrees and built great careers. And so I was really fascinated about how some people go on to succeed and how others have a more difficult time. I also thought that there were many bumps and obstacles along the road for myself and for my sisters. And I really wanted to pass on kind of a roadmap and of things to look out for and what you can do to remedy those things as you, work towards success in your career. Wanted to make it easier for people. I just didn't think it needed to be as hard as it was.
Sure. So in essence, you were looking to develop the roadmap so that, you were talking about the bumps in the road that you had. Maybe you could expedite that process or give people an idea of what to look out for. Is that correct?
Exactly. And I had worked in the nonprofit arena at a crisis center as a program director, and I had spent 10 years at a large division of Honeywell in Minneapolis, providing employee assistance counseling and managing the medical departments and the health and wellness programs, and then went on to United Healthcare and helped start the Optum program as vice president of operations. And so in all of my positions, I was in employee assistance psychology and management consultation. So our jobs were to help all the employees, whether that be locally in Minneapolis or across the country through United Healthcare. And so I heard lots of people's stories. I saw a lot of people succeed and a lot of people fail, and a lot of happiness and a lot of tragedies along the way. And I wanted to, as you mentioned, create a roadmap that would make things a little bit easier for more people to succeed.
Beautiful. Beautiful. So there's so many questions I want to ask, but I would love for us to just jump right into, some of the books you wrote and, obviously the research you've done. So can we touch on the Millionaire Mystique? What was this book about?
It was the first phase of my research. And again, I mentioned that moving to a really nice suburb of Phoenix, Arizona, I met a lot of people and got to know them well. And they would mention that they grew up in poverty, but they were driving a Mercedes, or they mentioned that they were terribly physically abused by one of their parents and they became an international artist. And so it really piqued my curiosity about how did they get from those difficult beginnings to where they were now. I had been doing leadership coaching, leadership assessments, executive coaching here in Phoenix, and knew I wanted to publish something. I had done quite a few speaking engagements and have had more hours doing one-on-one counseling and coaching with people than I care to say on this show, many, many years, and was looking for a new avenue to reach more people, to help more people. And that's my overriding mission, is to give back and to provide this information to as many people as possible. So I went actually to a weekend Harvard conference, publishing conference for healthcare professionals. And I presented my research to a panel of publishers and agents, and several people were interested in the research study. The publisher that picked me up and took the risk was Nicholas Brealey out of Boston and London, so it had an international flavor, but they wanted the book specifically about women. So I went back to the drawing board and found another 20 self-made female millionaires and focused the research specifically on women. It's a light textbook, a lot of very sound, specific advice about how women become successful. And it's really fascinating, too, in that I did interview several medical doctors for the book, and it's their advice on how to balance work and family, their advice on being organized and running a great medical business. But they also talked about the challenges they had and the struggles they had. The men were great, and that the men talked very specifically about the challenges they saw the women having. And many of the men said that it was much more difficult for the women to be professionally successful, to be financially successful, and also to be seen as an effective leader. So the men were just very honest and open, and these were CEOs and senior leaders in major companies.
So a question that comes to mind as I'm listening to all of this is in terms of the differences you see in men and women. What are some of those differences that you find when it comes to a woman trying to become a millionaire or success in their world versus a male? Obviously, I know this could go on, but just briefly.
Briefly speaking, there were more similarities than differences, which is what I suspected. I had been on the Fresh Start Women's Resource Center Board of Directors for quite a few years here in Phoenix, and we opened the Fresh Start Women's Resource Center about 12 years ago. And working with those really strong women on the board of directors, I thought there might be more similarities than differences, but we did a lot of statistical analysis. I worked with Dr. Mark Attridge, who I'd met at United Healthcare in Minneapolis, and very rigorous statistics. And the similarities included, of course, conscientiousness was number one. Follow through, very important. Being the first one at work, putting in your time, people can rely on you. The second thing was openness to experience. And so if someone really had an opportunity come their way, they were open to taking that opportunity. They weren't one to shut down new experiences. Third similarity was agreeableness. And when I say that, I'm not talking about saying yes. I'm talking about the big 5 personality characteristics. And agreeableness has to do with teamwork, affiliation, and being concerned about your coworkers. And as you know, that goes a long way. Low level of neuroticism was very important for the men and the women. The personality differences really came down to more who was absorbing the second shift after work, the household duties and the childcare duties. Hands down, 50% of the self-made female millionaires were taking the brunt of that second shift, where only 5% of the male self-made millionaires were handling the second shift. Many, many more of the women reported prejudice and discrimination. And the low level of neuroticism, as I mentioned, which is one of the big 5 personality characteristics, is critical. And the men showed a little bit lower level of neuroticism than the women demonstrated. They had great advice. They had great advice for people in terms of building teams and how to communicate well with others and how to overcome obstacles. All the men and women had obstacles and detours. But a couple of interesting things, these really strong, successful women said that they were comfortable arguing a point to closure. In other words, they were willing to stay at the table until there was resolution of conflict. Also, the women said that they oftentimes tried to look less feminine than they were to be more acceptable, so to speak, at work. So a lot of interesting findings in that book. It came out all over the world, and 2 weeks ago, a Japanese publisher picked it up, and it was released in Japanese in Japan.
Wow. Congratulations. That's amazing. That's amazing, really.
Yes, it was so fun to see what they did with the cover. I mean, there were hearts all over the cover and pink inserts, and it was just a very kind of fun, romantic way of presenting all of my research.
Wow. And so, as I was listening to you, I'm just fascinated by these qualities. You called them the big 5, correct? The conscientiousness, like you're saying, open to experience, agreeableness, the concern for coworkers?
Yes.
Low level of neuroticism. And you called it, what was it, the second shift? Were those the 5?
Agreeableness was the 5th big 5 personality characteristic. There's been tons of research done on them since the 1950s.
Beautiful.
But,
wow.
But of course, beneath these big 5 characteristics, I looked at other factors also. And the people that I studied reported greater than average health. They thought they were healthy individuals. They reported much greater than the norm life satisfaction. And many of them were choosing to work, understanding that meaningful work is critical to a sense of well-being.
I love it. That's great. So I know we can't dig into all of these because I'm sure all these qualities to great detail, but maybe something that would be helpful, especially for the listeners, is for us to maybe focus on one of these qualities and understanding how we might implement that today, even today. So I'm looking at this list. I'm trying to think of the ones that really pop out in the world of medicine. I think doctors tend to be very agreeable. However, I would like you to comment. When you say agreeableness, you were saying you're not just saying yes to everything, right? So can you just define that a little bit more?
It's about people's skills. And hands down, communication skills, written and oral, were highly recommended for people, for the men and the women who are very successful. And so as a doctor, your relationship with your patients, of course, is critical. You can cause yourself lots of problems by rushing through an appointment and not answering the questions and end up with lots of follow-up visits and lots of phone calls to your nurses. Or you can take the time and build that relationship and convey that you have the best interest of your patient in mind. So that would be one example. I know for myself in seeing clients too at Honeywell and United Healthcare, there were very serious domestic violence and workplace violence situations. And as a medical doctor, I'm sure that it's difficult to let some of the cases go. And so I think one of the things that would be important when you get home from your work day is to have a little bit of transition time, to have some rituals that work for you that help you transition from work to home to allow yourself to relax more and to rejuvenate before the next day. And then, of course, self-care is critical. I mean, when you're running businesses and providing medical care to patients, I mean, getting your own sleep, your nutrition, watching how much alcohol you drink, and other negative habits to really fortify yourself and take care of yourself so you can be the best that you can be when you head into work the next day.
Fantastic. I love it. So what would be an example, of course, you've worked with lots of professionals. What would be an example of something you teach people in terms of winding down from their work in business or medicine or what have you?
I really try to have people identify what would be considered maladaptive coping mechanisms and what would be healthy or adaptive coping mechanisms. I mean, you can come home from a long day of seeing patients and, go straight to your bar and, pour a martini and then pour another martini. And sure, that's a quick way to relax, but does that really help you integrate what went on during the day? I highly recommend things like going outside, going for a walk, talking to your spouse or a close friend, sitting down and having a nice meal, the simple things that really help you relax. I mean, of course, having a drink is great, and once in a while everyone overeats, but if you have a regular pattern of over-drinking, overeating, getting on your computer, doing social media for a couple of hours, and then try to go to sleep at night, that all detracts from your own mental health.
Wow. Yeah. And I totally agree. The simple things are quite powerful. I think what you said about making it a ritual is so important because I think if we don't set up, that common healthy plan, it's so easy to fall back into what you were saying with maladaptive patterns. So something I would love, even listeners to listen and take note of is how can you look at that end of work transition. What are you doing at that time? And what are some maladaptive patterns? That's a great takeaway from this part of the conversation. Great advice. I love it. And I also want to touch on, you were saying earlier that women who look less feminine in the workplace, that was a trend in, the successful. Why is that? I mean,
No,
what? Mm-hmm.
That's not quite what I said.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for that.
No worries. No, it is a bit misleading. What I said is that the women felt the added pressure of trying to look less feminine so they would look like they could have more credibility. So if somehow they believed that their appearance of looking feminine and attractive was detracting from them being seen as competent. It's what Dr. Carlise and Eagley wrote about in their book, The Labyrinth, which is just a great, chock full of research about women's issues, that women have to, or feel like they have to, walk that fine line between competent, which they call agency, and also affiliative, where they're warm and friendly. I mean, that's a tightrope to walk at times. And so I was just pointing out that there are different issues for women, different obstacles for women, and that's one of them. I'm not suggesting that women do need to look more feminine. In fact, I have a really strong bias that whether you're a man or a woman, that we all need to celebrate the way we look and the gifts that we have been given, and quit wasting so much time worrying about, the size of clothes we wear and how attractive we are. I think at my age, I've just realized that's just a lot of wasted time.
Sure. And I totally agree. That's an awesome message. And so to just clarify, were you saying maybe that when, women, for example, can loosen their associations with having to necessarily look a certain way or feel like they need to be accepted, that they actually end up, behaving more successfully when they drop, that idea? Is that what you were saying?
Not quite. These women are successful. They were already self-made millionaires. So they did not get their money through marriage or inheritance. So I was just pointing out the added pressure they felt.
The pressure. Gotcha.
It worked for them, On the other hand, the other 3/4 of them did not do that. I'm sorry, the other 2/3 of them did not do that, and they still were successful. But I interviewed many successful medical doctors, and one of who was a beautiful woman, and she said, celebrate your appearance.
Wow. I mean, I just think it's such an interesting topic. I'm sure we could talk about this for a while for sure. To move forward a little bit though, I would love for us to then talk about the latest book you've had in terms of the adversities that people face, the adversity advantage. Can you discuss how that kind of started and what your findings were?
Sure. The title of the book is The Adversity Advantage: Turn Your Childhood Hardship into Career and Life Success. And this book is based on the 5th phase of my research. And what happened during the first few phases is that the more men and women we got as participants into the research, and the more interviews I did with people, there became a very clear pattern that many of them had experienced childhood abuse, witnessed domestic violence, or had an alcoholic parent, and they still went on to be successful. And I was very curious about that. My dad was alcoholic while I was growing up, and I could clearly see the impact that it had on family members. And, I was one of the lucky ones. I was 19 years old when he quit drinking. So I extended the research. We did the 5th phase of research. I've interviewed over 40 people for the book, and we have over 310 men and women, and half of them are self-made millionaires or multimillionaires. But the other half, on average, makes a couple $100,000 annually. So it's a group, not that we were looking for how much money they made, but it's a group of people who have done significant things in life. As I mentioned, 40% of them either witnessed domestic violence, had an alcoholic parent, or were abused as kids. And so the research, I asked them about what was the mental health impact or the physical impact on them growing up in families that had a lot of chaos. And so they were very eloquent and descriptive in describing the impact on them as they were growing up. I then asked them about which of these things they still carry into adulthood. The bottom line is almost 1 out of every 2 employees coming into work had one of these experiences. And if you broaden the definition and include things like poverty or death of a family member or divorce in the family, then you're up to 60%. So it gives you a little bit different way of looking at your coworkers. If you're butting heads with a coworker, it begs the question of how you might be getting triggered by that person. Is it their language? Is it their tone of voice? Is it their appearance? Is it authority in general? And so I took a look at not only what was the impact on these kids, what they took into adulthood, what they took into their careers, the career choices they made, and then what things they did to remedy some of these maladaptive perceptions and behaviors to go on and have healthier behaviors to really succeed at work.
Wow, that's amazing. And obviously I'm extremely curious. So, when I think about the difficulties I've had in my life or in, other friends' lives or, whomever I might encounter, in every difficult situation, there's multiple ways you can take it, right? So obviously, this, you can look at it positively and think how you can take that experience and learn from it. But a lot of people, look at the other route and say, why me? Why me? So what is it about these individuals that have this turnaround, have this ability to change the script or, take these tough times and develop something from it?
Some of the things that the people I interviewed said were quotes such as, I would never want anyone to be treated the way I was treated, and I decided right then and there that I would change my life. Or, I was treated so poorly by my siblings that I decided I would only surround myself with respectful and loving people. Or, I became a raging alcoholic myself, and it started impacting my family, and I decided that I wanted to stop drinking, work a program for the betterment of my family. So their quotes were very moving. And of course, with anonymous research, people are just very honest and descriptive of what's going on. There was a pattern to what they experienced when they grew up with chaos. And I say that, and I mean the word chaos. When you have a parent who's coming home and who's drunk and maybe breaking things, or if there's domestic violence and you're a 5 or 6 year old child, that leaves an imprint. And I talk a lot about that in the first couple chapters of my book. What is the impact on a child emotionally and physically? And what a lot of the people have done is they've gone on and they've identified, what are my triggers? So for myself, when I'm having difficulties with someone at work, I pause and I really ask myself, how am I getting triggered by this person? Is it their authoritative way about them? I'm sure we've all had the experience where you're at your computer and someone reaches over your shoulder and comes in close to point out something on the computer screen and maybe grazes your shoulder, and you might have a strong reaction to that. Men and women, we all have them. And so it's really important to identify what triggers you at work. Is it other people being late? And what are the origins of that, where you get over the top angry when someone is 5 minutes late to a meeting? And so there's a chapter on emotional triggers and how to identify what your own triggers are, and then how to change that behavior at work. I have another chapter on what are the things you have internalized from your family. What are the messages that you've internalized and that you hang on to, that you take into your career with you, that might be self-limiting? Whether that be that you're not very smart, really, or that people don't like you very much. What were some of those negative messages you might have received as a child? And then, of course, when you grow up with abuse, there's the issue of shame. Just feeling like there's something wrong with you. Well, it's pretty hard to stand up in front of a whole group of your medical peers and give a presentation when you feel like there is something that is wrong with you and you're carrying around some shame. It's hard to explain all the different things I have in my book. Basically, in the Adversity Advantage, what I focused on was people's stories. Medical doctors, international artists, CEOs of companies. What are their real stories? What did they grow up with? And what are the connections they can make between their childhood experiences and their work style? Specifically in chapter 9, Your Childhood and Your Leadership, I encourage people to make the connection between what they experienced as a child and what kind of leader they are today. And I have a couple of great stories. One from the nonprofit sector, CEO of a large nonprofit organization in Minneapolis, and then also a CEO of an international healthcare company. And it's their stories about connecting their childhood to their leadership style.
just to poke in a little bit, first off, I think this is absolutely fascinating. I'm just getting lost listening to all of this. I loved what you mentioned about triggers. I think it requires so much insight to realize, these things, these triggers, and then also, like you were saying, to look back and to, find the origins of this and, understand yourself a little bit better. That's really interesting. And I'm sure you've researched so many people. So what is an example of someone with a drastic change? I mean, we don't have to get into too much detail, but give me an example of maybe someone who had like a pretty horrific or chaotic past, and what have they transformed into? What examples do you have of that?
I have so many examples, and
I'm sure
many of them are in the book. One that I find very meaningful, well, all of them are, but is a woman who grew up in New York City, going to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, so grew up in a very well-educated and refined family, but there was a lot of physical abuse. People were intellectually cold, except when they were raging, and she was the youngest in the family, and so took the brunt of a lot of abuse. She went on to become a very famous international artist, and she says, I paint to understand the world, and I paint to give meaning to my life. She has just done incredible good works throughout the world, and her paintings are beautiful. So many of the people that I've studied, it actually is fairly common that they've gone through sexual abuse and gone on to create beautiful and happy families themselves and happy marriages. And so the book is very positive and hopeful. I mean, it really gives people assessments. This is what you need to do. This is the journey, how you get from childhood troubles, childhood hardship, into being a happy and successful adult.
Sure. Wow. Now, I mean, just out of curiosity, on the flip side, let's say someone doesn't experience trauma. That's not to say that they can't be successful, right? But, as I'm listening to this, I think it's interesting. And of course, in this podcast, I interviewed some really great people. And it's so, interesting for me, because when I hear stories such as you have, when people look at their hardship and transform that into fuel, like you were saying, that moment, I'm not gonna grab that bottle anymore. I'm not gonna do what my parents did to me anymore. I'm going to build this life. It's interesting. I almost think once, the script changes, once the word choice changes, these people are able to take those tough situations and almost use it as fuel. Do you think in some ways might having all of these hardships and overcoming them be somewhat of an advantage?
Well, there are the everyday hardships that are difficult for people, maybe not having the money to pay a certain bill, or, getting a bad grade on a final exam. Those are the everyday kinds of things that, everyone needs to experience to build some resilience and grit. The kind of adversity I'm talking about, you really wouldn't wish on anyone. And what's remarkable is that these people have overcome their childhoods and gone on to be successful. But there is a lingering, maybe disruption in relationship to the self that many of the people struggle with, even into their 70s and 80s. So if someone can grow up with great parenting, a secure childhood where there's respect and consequences, of course, but also respect and love, and the message that you are precious, you are wonderful, and we believe in you and we love you. You can't make up for that in life. And I also, many of those people filled out my survey too. That's the other, 50% that we're not talking about today. And yes, they went on and, did great things also. What this group did is they took their survival skills. So whatever they learned to survive. So say someone grows up with a mom or dad who's always raging. and throwing things or breaking things. So maybe they never learn good communication skills. They go off to high school, maybe, play on the basketball team. They learn that they can't do that. They go into their first job. They pick up their computer, throw it against the wall. They get walked out the door. And that's a real example.
Wow.
And so people learn to communicate. So when they didn't learn it as a kid, so often they took that survival skill of kind of watching people and radar and intuition and really become students of communication, students of conflict negotiation, students of building relationships, and they take those survival skills, and that's what helps make them successful at work. So it's the very survival skills, and keeping the good ones and getting rid of the bad ones for when you're a kid, and taking those survival skills into work that can be really great weapons for success.
Wow, that's very interesting. Huh. I'm really fascinated about this topic because especially in the world of medicine, I don't think, and you were touching on this before, I don't think we open up about the vulnerable aspects of, what we do. But I have heard, one-on-one, people who have had very tough pasts, and it definitely correlates with what you're discussing, that, there's these deep steps of insight. They took that survival skill, like you were saying, and they're learners of life, and they start to develop their skills. And it's actually something that, ends up transitioning into the workspace as well, right? Where you watch what other individuals are doing, and you take in the good stuff and you remove the bad stuff, and you start to develop your practice, not only in the world of medicine, but also, as you were saying, like a practitioner of life in a way. That's so interesting. So to shift away from the books themselves a little bit, there's a few questions I love to ask all my guests. Specifically, one thing that I find very interesting is, obviously I find you very inspirational, but there's people that obviously you find inspiration as well. Who are your inspirations in life?
One of the TED Talks that I found very helpful in formulating my own research, and I think that your listeners would find very interesting, is Dr. Nadine Burke Harris. And it's a TED Talk, How Childhood Trauma Affects Health Across a Lifetime. And she not only is a medical doctor, but has a public health graduate degree. And so she merges the two, the focus on medicine and also public health. And she focuses on childhood trauma. And I found her TED Talk to be very inspirational. Maya Angelou, I think, is very inspirational to me. Dr. Carlison Eagley, of course, who wrote this amazing textbook on and studied women's issues, 20 years after we thought we were maybe had resolved a lot of those issues, and they just have some great research.
Wow. Fantastic. Great. And I want all the, I'll put this in the show notes as well on the website, but definitely for anyone who feels interested in these topics, they should definitely check out, the links and the books that you're referring to.
And another book that I really like is John Kabat-Zinn's book, Wherever You Go, There You Are, which when you're a child of, adversity, that really rings true, because no matter what age, no matter what partner you have, no matter what work environment you have, you still are who you are until you do that difficult work of looking within. I really like to have a work journal, and it sounds a little corny, but to have a journal that you can write in at night and just kind of jot down things that are troubling you, and, kind of look at what obstacles are that are keeping you from resolving a specific work issue, and then also different avenues you can take for resolution. And then, of course, the way to healing, and I'm not sure how much many medical doctors like to hear this, I believe is the way through feelings. And so you can run, but you cannot hide. Those feelings are there. And oftentimes, if you're feeling really anxious and overworked and stressed, It's really important to spend some time and just let yourself lean into the feelings, even for 10 minutes, and you might find that some of that stress dissipates.
That's great. That's great. 100% agree with you. I actually had a conversation with one of my friends recently, and I think a big issue that runs deep in the medical profession is all doctors feeling like they're superheroes. They kind of disconnect from what you were talking about, being human beings. And so that's a really important topic, something we touch on definitely in episodes here. And I love the journal concept as well. I think there's a great quote that I heard. I'm trying to remember from who, but the quote is, what gets measured gets managed. And so if you don't have a check-in system like you're talking about with journaling, how will you ever realize the difficulties or the successes or whatever is going on in your day? So 100% agree with that.
I like that. That's great. What was that? What doesn't get measured?
What gets measured gets managed. So basically the concept is, and again, listeners, like, this is a great concept. Like, for example, diet. The big example is there was a study that just looked at people who took pictures of their food versus people who did not take pictures of their food when they were starting a new diet. What ended up happening was, because the quote measurement was the photo, people who took pictures of their food actually ended up eating more controlled portion sizes because they were noticing more what was on the plate.
I love that. That is a great idea. I'm going to start doing that immediately.
So anyone on a diet, there you go. You can take photos of there's a study on that, because what's happening is your mind is you're refocusing your mind on measuring something. So if you have, for example, the check-in system with your feelings, you check in your feelings in a journal, for example, then you start like, wait a second, I'm feeling down today, or I'm feeling good today. You can start to wonder, how do we make changes? So once you start to quote measure it, things change. So I 100% agree with you there. Love that. I mean, journaling has been huge in my life. Anyways, Dr. Burke, what is happiness to you? I know that's a tough question, by the way.
Well, happiness for me has a lot to do with having a great family. And I think that having good relationships with family members, whether it's your family of origin or the family you create. I have 3 kids, and my career, I've tried a lot of different things over the last 30 years and have worked part-time, full-time, to accommodate raising a family. And as challenging as it's been the most rewarding thing for me. And then also having meaningful work. I mean, I just love what I do, and I'm passionate about communicating the message and the research that I find to help people feel better in life.
Amazing. I love that. Family and passionate work. That's great. And to close us off today, what is, you've had a very full career, working in business, doing the coaching, being an author, being a leader. What is a key takeaway you like to share with your clients that you'd like to leave with us today, or just a takeaway in general?
Well, I think the most important thing is, wherever you are, there you go. I mean, this is you, and we can spend lots of time and energy denying who we are, or we can stand in place and accept and say, this is who I am, and this is what I need to work on, and this is what I'm bringing to the table, good and bad, and that's the only way to move forward.
Wow, I love it. So connecting this with the journal idea, I have a really great idea takeaway for the listeners today. And that is, and this is a tough question. I actually heard this in another podcast, but try to answer the question, who are you? Answering the question, who are you? There's a lot of, in the work that you do, you might feel a little bit of discrepancy because you're feeling like you're being pulled away from who you are. But who are you? I think it's a fascinating question, and it's a difficult question to answer, but something that is really important.
That is a great question. And I'm impressed that you ask yourself that. I'm very impressed.
Well, thank you. I'm not trying to impress myself here, but I appreciate that. So, listeners, who are you? I mean, it's such a hard question. I mean, it definitely is a tough one to look into. But Dr. Jude Miller Burke, it was an absolute pleasure for you to give us some time today. I know you're very busy. You're doing a lot of great research. You're working with a lot of teams, and I'm so thankful for you giving your time today. Before we go, I would love for you to, and I'll put this on the website as well, what is a way that people can reach out to you and look into you? Obviously, we've referenced the books as well, but is there any other way people can connect with you?
Yes, I have a website, judemillerburke.com.
Fantastic. So we'll definitely put that in the show notes as well. Thank you so much for your time today. I learned a lot. I hope the listeners learned a lot. Again, thank you.
Thank you, Taylor. I appreciate your time. Good luck.
All right. Take care. Hey guys, we hope you enjoyed this episode, and we want you to definitely subscribe to our social media channels. Check out The Happy Doc on Facebook, iTunes, Twitter, and Instagram. Please like, subscribe, share, and send us feedback. And please check out the website, www.thehappydoc.com. Again, we hope you enjoyed The Happy Doc, the voice of fulfilled physicians. Peace out.